Alright, so I've got my motion detection program running here, and as you see, this is capturing me moving at the moment. If I move away, you can only see some shadows there. And so, well, this is great, but as I said, you may want to store the times when an object enters the frame so that you end up with something like this. So this is the first entrance as the start time, and here is where the object exited the frame, and then the second entrance of the object, and so on. So in this lecture I'll show you how to build that table using this script. So we will add some more code here. The way to start doing this is to first figure out the line in the script where the status is changing from, let's say, motion to non-motion. And so we have non-motion in here, so as soon as webcam triggers, let's say the status is 0. So it's just a symbol that I'm choosing to denote that there's no motion in the current frame. So then you get that first frame, which has a status of 0, and then you gray it out, and then you check if the first frame is none, and then you continue the loop again, and then you grab the second frame, so the status is still 0, and then you apply the difference, the threshold, dilate, and then you iterate through contours. So if you find an area that is less than, I changed this earlier, I put it 10,000, so I wanted to detect bigger objects because I was closer to the camera, so I wanted to adjust it. So depending on what objects you want to capture, you want to adjust these pixels here. So 10,000 is something like 100 by 100 pixels window. So we're checking if you don't find a window that is bigger than 10,000, then you continue to the beginning of the loop until you find a contour with this size bigger than this. When Python finds that contour with that size, we want to change the status to 1. Okay. And let's now print out that status variable. So what you want to do is print it at the end of your loop, so status. And let me delete these numpy arrays which are being printed. We don't need those, and make some room here. So this is inside the loop. And I now expect to see the status of 1 or 0 printed out, depending on whether there is an object in the frame or not. So if this is working, that means we now have the actual status of the frame, and we can use that 1 and 0 for other things. So let's see. Okay, there's nothing at the moment. Let me minimize this so we can see the console. This as well. Great. So 0 is being printed out, and if something shows up, now you see ones. Again, 1 0 1 1 0. Great. We can now simply apply a datetime method, such as datetime.now, and that would record the time of each frame. So we don't want that exactly. We want to use the datetime.now method, but not like that, because that would record times for every frame. So what we want instead is, we want to know when the status changes from 0 to 1, which indicates that there is an object entering the frame. So we want to record that time. And we also want to record the other time when the status changes from 1 to 0, so the object exits the frame. Let's say status list, that would be equal to empty brackets, so an empty list. And then I want to append the status of the object to that list. So after this loop finishes, which is here, so I want to be here at the same level with the loop, so I want to apply something outside the loop. So status list, I want to append the current status of the list here in this status list. Great. And to illustrate, to show you what this status list is about, I would like to print that out actually. And I would want to print out the list outside the while loop, so I don't want to print out every time the loop iterates. So non-movement, movement here, and quit. So these are the statuses for each of the frames. So 0, 0, 0 non-movement, and then something entered the frame, and that something entered like, let's say, 30 frames, and then the object exits the frame, and that's it. So what we want to do now is we want to capture, so what's next? So the next thing is we want to capture the time that we switch from 0 to 1, and also from 1 to 0. So basically what we're interested about is to capture the last two items of the status list. So let's say we have status 0, so we start with an empty list. The first item that will be appended to the status list is 0. And then the second item, let's say, will be 0. Or let's say will be 1. And so we want to apply a conditional to check whether the last two items of the list are changing. So I know this may be confusing, but once I write these 4 lines of code here, you will understand it, and it will make a lot of sense. So we want to check if status list, so the last item of the status list, which has an index of -1, remember list indexing, if that is equal to 1, and status list with index of -2, so the item that was added first, the item that was added second, is equal to 0, we want to record the date time of this event in a list. So let's create a list here, say times equals empty, and then we go here, and we say times dot append datetime dot now. You know about this function already. So we want to append the current timestamp when this change occurred. So that means we need to import, or from date time import date time. So datetime class from the datetime library. So we're basically recording the time when the status changed to 1, and we also want to record the time when the status changes from 1 to 0. So we would have a similar conditional, but this would be 0 and this would be 1. Okay. So what's happening here is, let's go back to the start of the loop. So Python captured the first frame and it converts it to gray and blurs it and applies a Gaussian blur there to the first frame. And then we store the first frame in the first frame variable, and then we go ahead and calculate the difference between the first frame and the current frame, find contours, and then if this loop finds contours greater than 10,000, the status variable changes from 0, so it started at 0, so it changes at 1 here. And that means this empty status list will get another value. But the first value is always 0, so the list will start with 0, you know, like here. So the very first value is 0. And so on. Let's say for the next 10 frames, it will be 0, 0, 0, 0, and so on. And then if an object enters the frame, and then the status changes to 1, so we'll have 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 1. And then what we're doing here is we're comparing the last two items of the list. Okay. And here I would like to print out the times list so that you see what's going on. And I expect to get an error at the first execution here because we have something more to do, but let's see. So yeah, it says list index is out of range. So that means Python is having troubles accessing the second item of the list because the list has no items here. So it has no items, and then we add an item. So we add status, and then Python tries to find the second item, but there is no second item. So we need to do a trick here. We need to add two items. Okay. Let's say none and none. Now let's execute the script again. So there's no object there at the moment. Now an object appears. It goes out again 2 times and 1 more time. So 3 entrances. And I quit it. So let me go through this list now. This is our times list. And so this is the time. So the year, the month, the day, and hour, minutes, and seconds. And then microseconds in here. So this is the start time when an object entered the frame for the first time. And then this is the time when the object exits the frame. So I stayed there for 2 seconds, so 51 up to 53. Then the next object entered the frame, so from this seconds to this, so for 2 other seconds. And then another third time from 0 to 1 for 1 second. So we've got 3 entrances in the frame. So I hope that makes sense. This is good, but sometimes it can happen that when you're running the script, so you have background, then the object shows, the object disappears, shows again, and then if you quit the program at this point, so let me quit it, you'll see that you have the start time here for the first entrance, then the end time, and then you have another start time here for the second entrance, but then you don't have the exit time. So you may want to add the end time of the exit of your last object, which happens to be when the window was quit. So you want to go here at the end, and the script is waiting for a key. So if you press quit here, the while loop will break, but before that you may want to check the status. So if status is 1, and in that case you would end up with this scenario here. So if status is 1 when you press the Q key from the keyboard, you want to add another item to your times list. So times append datetime.now. Great. So that should work differently now. So let's execute the script. Now object, object, no object, object in the frame, quit. And now we should have 4 datetimes here. 4 timestamps, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this here was recorded in this expression here. Great. And the next thing we want to do now is to throw this list into a pandas data frame and then into a CSV file. So we'll have a start and an end column, and in the start column we would have, for instance, this value, and in the end column we would have the other values, so this one here and the last one, this. Okay, so first of all we need an empty data frame, a pandas data frame. So we'll be using pandas to create data frames, of course. So let me import pandas here, and let's say data frame df equals to pandas dot data frame with columns start and end. As easy as that. So that will create a data frame structure for us, which has no values but it has 2 columns. And then the next thing you want to do is outside the loop. So once you have generated your times list, you want to iterate through that list and then append those values into the pandas data frame. So you need a loop, let's say for I in range. And so here you'd have to iterate with a step of 2. And you'd want to iterate as many times as there are values in the list. So you start from 0 and then you'd end up at how many values you have in the list. Well, you can find that using the length method. So length times with a step of 2. Great, so that will be, so for each iteration df, so the data frame will be equal to itself dot append, so you are updating the data frame, and here you'd need to pass a dictionary. So for the start column you'd want to enter times I, and for the end column, so the keys of the dictionary here are start and end, and you'd want to append times I plus 1, and you want to ignore index, so equal to true. Great. So what this is doing is, let's say for I in range, this would be, let's say we have a list with 6 items, so we have 3 start times and 3 end times. So that would mean the range 0 to 6 with a step of 2. So for 0 we would do this. So we would start from 0 in the loop, and we would access the item with the 0 index in times, which happens to be this item, for instance, so the first item. And then we append that item to the first row of the start column. And then we access the item 0 plus 1, which happens to be item with index 1, which would be this item, so the second item. And we append that item to the end column for the same row. So that's it. Then we go to the next item. So this time we would start with index 3. So 3 here, added to the start column, and then 4 added to the start column, to the end column, sorry, and so on. And lastly, we would have a data frame. And what you might want to do then is df.toCSV, let's say times.csv. So we are exporting the data frame to a CSV file. Great, so let's see how this will go. It's getting quite dark here. Okay, and one more time. 3, quit. And as you see, times.csv was created in my file system. So these are the times. I can also open it using Excel. So these are the start and end times. If you want, you can format them. Just format cells here, and you can see the dates now. Great. Great. So that ends this lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it. We have quite a good script now, and to make it more beautiful, we would want to display these times in a graph. So that's how you turn your data into real information. And we'll do that through the next lectures, but before I'd like to introduce you to the Bokeh library, which is a library for interactive visualizations in the browser. So please follow the lectures in the correct order, and I'm sure you will learn a lot. Talk to you later.